July 20th, 1969, a day that changed human history. It was the day the very first human stepped foot on the surface of the moon. It's something that we all know happened and something that we've all seen pictures of. And I want to try to show you both sides of if this thing and this event really did happen. It's one of the most debated historical events that has taken place in U.S. history, and I really want to just showcase both sides. So we've all seen different clips and pictures of that day, but how much have you really looked at them? Did you spend time trying to dissect all the little pieces that could be in there? So I sat down, I looked at the whole broadcast a couple of times through. I read many articles and did lots of research trying to figure out if this event really did happen, trying to let you get all the facts and information so you can make the decision for yourself. So with all things, for someone to do something, they have to have a reason or motivation for wanting to do it. And for the US, the motivation for faking the moon landing would be that they were caught up in the space race and in the heat of the Cold War. So at this time, the US had just lost two parts of the space race. They lost to the USSR in both getting a satellite into space and then the first man into space. Russia was able to get Sputnik and Vostok 1 up in the atmosphere before the US ever was. So in Vostok 1 was Yuri Alexeyevich. He was the first man ever to be in space. He orbited the planet one time and was very famous and known for being the first man ever to be in space. And something that's kind of significant about that is the US was only 1 month behind the USSR in this case. They were 1 year behind in the satellite, but just the 1 month gap that they had in getting Alan Shepard into space was something that the US media really hounded on people for, and kind of just a huge letdown on the face of the US that they weren't able to get that done. Additionally, with that, when JFK was running for president his first time or his only time, he made a promise that by the end of the decade, the U.S. would be on the moon. And the clock was starting to tick on this. The current president, Richard Nixon, was very adamant about wanting to be on the moon. And it just kind of happened that in the year 1969, with only a few months left, they were finally able to get this done. And it's also rumored that the USSR was maybe a couple of weeks or a month away from launching their own space program, so the U.S. had to do it right now, or else they were going to lose once again. So I wish I had some kind of way to show you guys the pictures and videos I'm going to describe, and I'm going to do my very best to give you detail about these pictures so you can try to understand what I was seeing when I was doing my research. So the first picture that I really want to highlight is there's a photo of a guy, or an astronaut, climbing up into the spacecraft, and you can see him, and then you see the shadows of the spacecraft behind him, so you shouldn't really be able to see him because he's removed from the only light source that there is. The only light source in space is the sun. There's nothing else there. So if he was in the shadows, how is it possible that he was fully illuminated and you can see him? And there's been some people to say that this is due to a dual light source, the fact that Hollywood or whoever was filming this made it and went out of their way so you could see this man. Next is a picture of a close-up astronaut visor where you can see what could potentially be maybe a stagehand kind of off to the side. You also don't see any stars or anything around them. And that's kind of a thing with the entire broadcast itself. There's not one star that you can see in this entire broadcast. And NASA went out and said that this is due to, this is due to the fact that when light reflects off the moon, it cancels out the stars. And this is a believable thing. I do understand that. But there's a lot of other things that I saw in the video that are a little more suspicious. The first is the very famous sea rock. There's a picture of some astronauts out doing something in the distance, and in the foreground you can kind of see a picture of a rock with a C on it that looks like it was written in marker. And it's been debated on if it was maybe planted there artificially or if it was really there or what it was, but it's just something that you have to recognize a little bit, because why was this in the situation? Why is this here? It just works. It's very distinct. It's definitely human handwriting, and it's never really been explained why this sea rock was there. Also, this has been talked about in a couple of different articles I read, is this different lengths and shadows. So you see two people standing right next to each other or maybe a little bit further apart, and their shadows should be the same length because they're the same distance away from the sun. Yet their shadows are different lengths, saying that maybe they're different parts of light coming at them. This is kind of a big theme, is because in space you only have the one light, so what is really happening with that? Additionally, with that, there's been some pictures where people have tried to highlight strings above some of the astronauts where you can see cables that were trying to make them look like they were levitating. And there's also just different things about the slow motion filming where you can kind of see that it looks kind of choppy. It's also part of the time, but just the fact that it doesn't really look right when you watch the entire broadcast. And the third point that I wanted to bring up was about Stanley Kubrick. He was a director, a very famous filmmaker at the time, and the year before this came out, he released 2001: A Space Odyssey. So this was a sci-fi film that took place in outer space, and a lot of the things that you kind of saw in this movie were very similar to what you saw on the moon. It's possible this was just a very good representation of it, or that maybe Stanley was some way involved in creating the set. So there was an interview that's been lost, but the transcript's still alive, and no one really knows how accurate the transcript is. But he claimed that he had something to do with the U.S. faking the moon landing, that he was directing it, and it was his set and everything. And it's just something that could be very interesting to think about because you don't totally know if it's true, you don't know if it's false, it's just something strange. And something additionally, too, is just the fact that the U.S. could make a set like this, so you can't rule out the fact that because it's possible to do it, they didn't do it. It's just kind of like a strange paradox kind of thing where it's just something that you have to consider and think about just a little bit. So to conclude, I just want to highlight that it's very possible that men were on the moon on July 20th, 1969, but we don't totally know all of the details, and we don't know exactly what went down. So just wanted to open up your mind a little bit about it and just try to get you thinking in new ways about what actually happened on that day. So I have 3 questions here. The first is, could photos have been photoshopped? And this is definitely could have happened. There's no real way to know if it did or didn't. But a lot of the photos you see are very similar, so you just kind of like to assume that the photos that you're seeing are real and they haven't really been altered with time, but there's no way to know. It's just like all things, if something had been photoshopped or not, it's very hard to tell if it's done well. Excuse me. And another question I have is, what happened to the Stanley Kubrick interview? And no one really knows. It was just mysteriously lost, or maybe it never happened. But it's just something strange where it just kind of all of a sudden was there and then it wasn't there, and some people remember it and some people don't. It's just kind of, it's been so long since it happened, and he's now dead, so you don't really have a way to ask him about it. It's just kind of gone with time. And just, that's a huge thing that I think is about this whole entire topic, is a lot of it's now so old that we're not really sure what's true and what isn't, because just all been mixed up in our minds. And lastly is about how there's 400,000 people that were involved in the moon landing. How is it possible that not one of those people would have talked if it was fake? And what I say to this is, I don't think that those people knew that it was fake. I think the astronauts knew, and that was about it. I think that everyone that was in control and worked on the rockets and everything, they truly believed that what they were doing was sending a man onto the moon, and that all those things that they did mattered, but maybe in reality they were just typing on a computer and nothing was really happening. And it's very possible that they tried to make things work in ways so it appeared that they were doing something, but they really weren't. So just something to additionally consider, and thank you very much for watching my speech and listening to my questions.